surplus without checking that they hadn't been budgeted in case there was an emergency. It may be considered by some residents that your proposal of the use of funds in a certain area of our borough to fight a problem that is localised may be inappropriate use of funds. We can provide a safe, clean and green environment for our residents and visitors. We can strive to provide a home for all. We can regenerate our town centre. The original change to the budget proposed by P&R to slash the communications budget would result in us not being able to inform. We would not be able to assist those who find themselves on tough times, and we would not be able to tell potential visitors to our town what we have, where we have them, and when we have these events on, and that we have places to visit and even cultural to take in. We will not be able to cost-effectively communicate with our residents about the services they expect and that can be benefited from. Please vote for this amendment as it has merit and has been looked at by the departments that it affects. No. Faye. Faye.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm here. Now, in all seriousness, it's rather strange, isn't it, that I stand here to second this motion, because I was at the Policy and Resources meeting where I supported taking the money away from communications. So ain't it strange that I stand here to say I made a mistake? Because I did. I have changed my mind. Can you believe that I stand here as a councillor to say I have looked at the facts, I have changed my mind? I had full sympathy with my colleague who put the motion forward to say we want more money in enforcement, because I immediately thought of people in my own patch where we've got fly tipping. Do we read about it in the papers? No. And so that's where I was thinking. But afterwards I thought, hang on a minute, our communications people are actually an integral part of our services. They're not a separate section over there while the services are over here. They're integral. They are there to warn, inform and educate. So although the amendment does in effect reduce the surplus, which does concern me a bit, but we are where we are, and I made the decision that I made. But I hope you understand that I am prepared to change my mind and be brave enough to say so, even to my residents in Barming who are fuming at the fly tipping and whatever, because we do need communications for the reasons that my colleague Councillor Morton has set out. They do work efficiently, they do work with us, and they work for us. So please, I really strongly urge people to support this amendment to the budget. Thank you.
Councillor Blackmore.
Crikey, Mr. Mayor, I thought it would be way down the list. Thank you very much.
No, you're on top of my list.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, what did you say?
I said you're on top of my list.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly the place I should be. Thank you for that. Thank you, Councillor Cox, for an incredibly negative message. My goodness, if any of us weren't about to, I don't know, jump off a cliff, I think that would definitely make us do it. I think what we need to do is present a more positive message and a more positive attitude. That's what the Council needs, and that, I think, is something that the communications team do for us. They present the positive face, which is what we should do, not dwell on the negative. We should be putting Maidstone forward as the premier town in this county. So let's end the negativity and deal with the positive stuff. Councillor Mrs Gooch is absolutely right. There was cross-party support at Policy and Resources. And I must admit, I do think it's a good idea to take it from the surplus, because it will still leave us with the surplus. It will still leave our communication team intact, and I think it enables us to get out our positive message. I'm a little bit concerned about the attitude that environmental enforcement is localised. Now, my recollection at Policy and Resources, when we were looking at the strategic plan, was the insertion of the additional word green. Safe, clean and green. I wanted blue, but everyone else went for green. So unlucky for me, but you've got to try these things. So if we're looking at green, which occurs all around the borough, and we want to protect that, I don't think that's localised. I think that's across the borough. So if we are looking to protect our environment across the borough, then, sorry, it's not a localised issue. I think this is something that affects every single resident. So, bearing in mind this gives us a balanced budget and takes a little bit out of surplus, I would be delighted to support your amendment, Councillor Cox.
Councillor English. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I agree with much of what Councillor Blackmore has just said. Well, I don't agree with that. Okay. Clearly, enforcement, whether it's planning enforcement or environmental enforcement, is an issue for urban and rural residents. It affects many areas in my own ward. I'm sure every single councillor here and most of the officers can think of areas that are affected. I don't think anyone thinks that there is anything wrong with increasing the resources available for enforcement. Our argument between ourselves has always been about how that's done. So I think that without rehashing the debates over communications, although I would merely observe that the relationship between communications and backroom services and frontline services are more complicated than people often imagine, I will simply say that I hope we as a council can agree this amendment represents a positive way forward and support it across party lines.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bryce.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. You know me, I love a survey, and in the last full residents survey in 2017, the overwhelming priority for residents was a clean and safe environment. 2 in 3 cited this as the key priority for Maidstone Borough Council, 66%. So the fact that Councillor Cox feels that it's a localised issue belies the fact that actually for residents, for our residents, when they were last surveyed, this was their #1 priority. Conservatives have looked at the evidence, and we have been pushing this for several years now. And when we listen to our residents, and when we listen to our residents, they say to me, we'd rather have the 20k that you spend on a Borough Council free sheet on tackling the fly tipping that they see every day in the lanes and the streets around the county. And the suggestion that 20k should be just handed over to environmental enforcement because we've raised the issue to see what they can do actually reveals that the Liberal Democrats are failing to drive strategic priorities for this council, failing to listen to our residents when we spend and invest money in surveying them.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harper.
Right. Not to support the amendment and therefore the amended budget, we believe would be foolhardy and putting party politics ahead of the people of Maidstone. We have council elections every year, so let's not use the budget to score petty party political points at the expense of the interests of the borough's residents and businesses. Communications, as Councillor Blackmore said, is really important for us. Maidstone needs to be promoted heavily for a hub for economic development, which is succeeding, visitor attraction, but also to get residents' pride back in their borough, which does get bashed from time to time. And so therefore, let's show that all the 5 groups on the council here tonight can work together and to actually push forward a budget which is in the interests of the whole community.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. But apart from telling Councillor Blackmore that I'd happily add blue into the other policy, in view of all the trolleys I've fished out of the River Medway over the years, I think everything I was going to say has been said.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think we've found pragmatically a positive way forward here. I think on the environmental enforcement front, yes, there are problems. I mean, lots of my residents think I've been on a community service order for about the last 30 years, so I don't know what I must have done. But I collect an awful lot of litter and report an awful lot of fly tipping. So I really do think we need to be proactive. And I think that in terms of the system, you know where the rubbish is coming from, but you can't prove it. And it's so frustrating, I think, to all those involved. So if we can find a little bit of extra money through a creative way forward, I think that's all to the good. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the comms issue, the media and comms issue. Because I think that's often an easy target, in that people look at that and say, you know, why is there such a big comms team and so on. But if you think back to a week ago, when we did have the severe snow and cold weather, the comms messages that were going out, within one day, on that worst day, there were 1.8 million hits for the Kent Snow website that was giving out information about vulnerable people, about looking after neighbours, about all the safety messages which needed to go out. So I don't think it is that simple. We have a budget, we've all worked towards it. I think we've found a way through it, and I hope that we can agree fairly unanimously that for this year at least, everybody can be happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Perry.
Thank you. My first observation on this is the word slash was used. We're talking about 20k here. We're not slashing anything, quite frankly. I would like to see the Liberal script, because it might make quite interesting reading, I think. What I would say about this, and there's one issue that I really am not happy about this, is it's a one-off. And I understand pragmatic solutions. I spent a lifetime working trying to find pragmatic solutions. But a one-off on such an important issue as this, and I totally support what Councillor Bryce has said, is for me not on. Now, that is not right. This needs to be a permanent addition, because this is an important issue. We all see this, and to call it localised is really not understanding this at all. So I could support this if there was a pragmatic solution that made this permanent, but I will not support it on a one-off out of a surplus. That, to me, is fundamentally wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Matt Burton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I will be as brief as possible. I just wanted to make a note that I'm very pleased to hear Councillor Harper observing that issues arise from having an election every single year in Maidstone. I would just like to put it to him that it is not the position of any one particular party on this budget that is the issue, but the fact that we have an election every year in Maidstone at all. We've also heard many people talking about finding inventive ways of creating this budget structure to lead us through the next years. It might be worth noting that, according to our Director of Finance at the Council, having an election once every 4 years at Maidstone would free up £100,000 over that cycle, and is supported heavily by the public of this borough.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor David Burton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I want to make a very brief point. From this side, I really don't think we are underestimating the great value that the communications team do give in actually conversing with our residents. But it is that same team that we pay to read the KM for us every week and write us an email that gets longer and longer summarising the... Perhaps they're the kind of areas that we're actually talking about, not the really good work that the communications team do.
Thank you, Councillor. Hello. Councillor Brian Mortimer.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I think we're going from from quite a good conversation to the ridiculous now, getting into politics, which is what we don't want. But one simple solution to raise about £200,000 or £300,000 is to ask our colleagues at Kent County Council to give us the 15% pay rise that they got, and we can put it into enforcement. That will solve our problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you very much, Councillor Ring. Councillor Ring.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do things in my own simple way. What I've listened to tonight is quite a shame. The comms team. This is nothing personal, none at all. But sometimes when you have to cut back, you have to look at things how they are. I'm afraid when I have to cut back, I have to look at it as a mother and as a wife and make things go round. I always thought that our comms team was put together to the amount it is, and tell me if I'm wrong, is to let people know how good we are at the council. Well, my motto is, I've always thought we were good if we didn't get complaints. If departments and managers were really pleased that we got no complaints. So why do I need the comms team to tell me there's no complaints, when I know in my heart of heart there is sometimes? So if some people could start being honest about things and say, yeah, we did get that wrong, and we are going to work together to get it right, because I get more information from the people sitting over in the corner, the Downs Mail and the Kent Messenger, and I'm thinking, hey, what's gone on? And I didn't know about it. I don't want to sit down as a councillor to see the wakey-wakey. I go in and I see how well the staff work. I don't need to know about the Kent Messenger. So all I'm saying is, don't get me wrong. I'm pleased with what goes on, but we don't need all that. And if that could be cut down just a little bit, I think we would both be sitting there agreeing on both sides. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that's everybody that wants to speak. Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much. It's great to be able to sum up. I do think that we forget we are a large company, and that company needs to communicate with its employees as well. And we need to communicate up and down, and that's another thing that the comms team provide for us. The comms team and environmental enforcement have actually recently been restructured, and that's another reason to give this 1 year, is to be able to bed that amalgamation of the departments together and to look, not environmental enforcement, but the way that the comms has done for environmental enforcement and for heritage culture. It's all been brought together. I do think it's important to look at this and to give a year to see what can be achieved with the money, because I do feel it's important to speak with these departments and to find out what they want to achieve with the money. Because if they haven't got a reason to have that money, then we are barking up the wrong tree. I would love to know who, from the other side, did actually speak to them. But I'll leave it there and ask them about where they'd like to spend that money. Okay. Well, I leave it with you. Please support the amendment. Thank you.
Chief Executive.
Before we move to the vote on the amendment that has just been debated, I understand that at the point at which I announced the outcome from the last amendment, the webcast wasn't working properly. So I'm going to announce it again, and then we'll move to the vote on this amendment, okay? So the vote on the first amendment was 21 for, 29 against and 1 abstention, which meant that the amendment fell. So we're now moving to the vote on the second amendment. It's the shorter one,
a two-page document just to make sure you've got the right one. And we'll go through the same process. So if you can tell me whether you're voting for, against or abstaining. Starting with Councillor Atkinson. Barnard? Blackmore? Borton? Bryce? Burton? David? Matt Burton? Clark? Cox? Cumming? Daly? English? Fermor? Field? Fissenden? Fort? Garland? Garton? Gooch? Greer? Grigg? Harper? Harvey? Harwood? Hasty? Hinder? Joy? Lewins? McLaughlin? Brian Mortimer? Derek Mortimer? Mumford? Nagy? Newton? Perry? Pickett? Powell? Prendergast? Ring? Robertson? Round? Janetta Sams? Tom Sams? Spooner? Springett? Stockel? Vizard? Webb? Wilby? Willis? And Wilson. Thank you. I'm sure some of you were keeping a tally as we went along, but the outcome is 33 votes for the amendment, 15 against and 3 abstentions, which means that that amendment is carried. And so the combination of the original recommendations plus that amendment now become the substantive.
Councillor Wilson?
Mr Mayor, I don't think there's anything else to be said. I suggest we proceed to the vote immediately, as long as everybody's clear what we're voting on. Thank you.
That's seconded by Councillor English. Thank you. Right, move to vote.
Okay, so if we could go through the same routine again, please. Yes, yeah. So that's all the recommendations that were originally moved, but as amended according to Councillor Cox's amendment. So, Councillor Atkinson. Barnard. Blackmore. Borton. Bryce. David Burton. Matt Burton. Clark. Cox. Cumming. Daly. English. Fermor. Field. Fissenden. Fort. Garland. Garton. Gooch. Greer. Grigg. Harper. Harvey. Harwood. Hasty. Hinder. Joy. Lewins. McLaughlin. Brian Mortimer. Derek Mortimer. Munford. Nagy. Newton. Perry. Pickett. Powell. Prendergast. Ring. Robertson. Round. Janetta Sams. Tom Sams. Spooner. Springett. Stockel. Vizard. Webb. Wilby. Willis. And Wilson. Thank you. So the voting was 34 in favour and 17 against, which means that the recommendations as amended, so the substantive motion, is carried.
Right, thank you, members. Let's now move on. Agenda item 14, Democracy Committee, 14th of December 2017. That's page number 12. I call upon Councillor Newton to move the recommendations of the Democracy Committee relating to the appointment of an independent person to serve on the Joint Independent Remuneration Panel. Recommendations on page 12.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The recommendation made following the meeting on the 14th of December 2017 was that Mr Christopher Webb be appointed as the independent person for the Joint Independent Remuneration Panel. The reason for the recommendations: the committee interviewed the applicant and was satisfied that he met the criteria for the position, given his past experience and his answers to the questions asked of him. Thank you.
Thank you to Councillor Newton. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Harper? Yeah, I'll second it. Do you want to speak? No. Is that agreed? Thank you. Agenda item 15, Democracy Committee, 10th of January 2018, page 13. I call upon Councillor Newton to move the recommendations of the Democracy Committee arising from the review which has been undertaken of the Council's representation on outside bodies. Recommendations on page 13 and 14.
Thank you. On the 10th of January 2018, a Democracy Committee reconsidered 4 outside bodies, which culminated in providing a final list to be recommended to Council following a series of meetings to discuss the outside bodies review. The outside bodies are actually listed there, and I don't think I need to go through them all. The reasons for the recommendation is the Democracy Committee had formed a working group to carry out an in-depth review of all the outside bodies, and in doing so made their recommendations to the committee at its meeting on the 6th of September 2017. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Harper?
Yeah, I'd like to second and make propose an amendment to the report. I think the amendment's been circulated, but I'll just read out it very quickly. So the amendments are to make the following amendments to the outside bodies on the list: removal of the benefit
Thank you, Councillor. Do we have a seconder? Councillor English?
Councillor Harper's picked up the point I'd prepared for, but I think there might be some element of confusion about One Maidstone. There was a liaison committee on which had 3 council members, and I believe that this report refers to that liaison committee which no longer exists. So we can't appoint anyone to it. There is one board member appointment to the board of One Maidstone and one officer appointment, not 3. That is the old liaison committee which no longer exists. So I think that needs to be deleted from the report and replaced by the one board town centre. Actually, it's not specified. It's one member of Maidstone Borough Council members and one officer are appointed. And I wish to second the recommendation on the papers with that amendment to the report.
Councillor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If I can perhaps just draw upon the point that Councillor English has just been making, because I've been looking at this issue of the appointment to the board at One Maidstone. It is my understanding that the current incumbent of that position was appointed when it was town centre management, and there hasn't actually been a formal appointment, although the incumbent does attend in that capacity. And I want to make certain that within this motion tonight we're not actually making that appointment, but making it very clear that actually the post is currently vacant, because there never has been a formal appointment.
May I just briefly, it isn't vacant, but it would become so very, very soon. So I think it would, because of the automatic ending. It is clearly, I won't go into the detail, but it would need reappointment in the next, very soon in the new municipal year anyway. So I think the point is moot.
Thank you. No? Dan?
Mr Mayor, I'm not quite sure whether my hearing is defective. I suspect it might be. Some of the times I speak in this chamber, I fail to hear what's going on. But I don't know whether I heard Councillor Harper correctly. But if I did hear him correctly, I would like him to please explain why Allington Millennium Green suddenly appeared on a list which didn't appear on the list I've got in front of me. Because if he is asking that a High Street member be appointed to that, I'd like to know, please, what his reason may be. Thank you.
It was Collis Green, not it was the Collis Green, not Allington.
Councillor Harper, Chief Executive would like to clarify a point with you.
If I might clarify, in your list you do refer, and I think it was pointed out, that the liaison group doesn't exist anymore. For the benefit of everybody else in the room, could you just indicate how you'd like to handle that?
If the group doesn't exist anymore, then obviously that part of the amendment has to be taken out.
Agreed.
Councillor Round.
Can I ask for clarification of what it actually means on Councillor Harper's amendment, where it actually says Upper Medway Internal Drainage Board? What is the suggestion and proposal for that, please?
Is this working? It was a typo, I think. And if you look at the report there, it didn't actually say Upper Medway Drainage Board. So it's just making sure it's recorded properly.
Councillor Bryce.
Maybe Councillor Harper could elaborate on the panels where it says leader automatic appointment or leader to delegate to another member. How is that facilitated through a committee system? Could you outline if that's going to be done through a committee or it's just at the leader's whim of who she would like to have go there?
Sorry? Councillor.
Oh, God, this is hard work. The idea is if the leader, for instance, doesn't wish to take her place or his place in terms of those particular committees or any relevant chair, that they can delegate it to another member to take, so Maidstone is represented. For instance, it might not be Fran wanting to go. She might say, could someone else go? As long as the council is represented, that's all. We're giving a bit of scope for common sense.
Actually, ask Paul Harper if he wants to.
Councillor Harper, do you want to sum up before we go to a vote? Right, let's go to the vote. Yes, but councillors, thank you. We're going to have a vote on the amendment. Name vote? It's not a name vote. No. All those in favour? Those against?
There must be some abstentions.
Yeah. Abstentions?
So the amendment's carried?
The amendment is carried. It now becomes a substantive motion.
Now you have to take another vote. So for the substantive motion now.
Right, councillors, can we have a vote now on the substantive motion? Those for? Those against? Abstentions? That is carried. Thank you. Councillor Harper's leaving. Paul Harper's leaving. Okay. Right, thank you, councillors. Can we now move on, please? Agenda item 16. Policy and Resources Committee, 14th February 2018, page 23. I call upon Councillor Mrs Wilson to move the recommendations of the Policy and Resources Committee relating to the Strategic Plan 2015-20, 2018-19 refresh, recommendations on page 23. Councillor.
Mr Mayor, I don't intend speaking for any length on this. All I will say is that there's been a lot of confusion over, let's get it the right way round, safe, clean and green. I've had a cursory look at councils up and down the country. Increasingly, they are including green in their priorities, including a lot of Conservative councils, which fascinated me. If we will elucidate on what green precisely means as we go forward so that everybody's very clear. But tonight, all I think I want to do, because it's been discussed in committee over and over again, is to move the recommendation that you'll find on page 23, that the Strategic Plan 2015-20, 2018-19 update is approved by this council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Barnett. Thank you. Is the recommendation agreed? Thank you. Agenda item 18, Employment Committee, 15th of February 2018, page 136. I call upon Councillor Gooch to move the recommendations of the Employment Committee relating to Pay Policy Statement 2018 recommendations on page 136.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Following its meeting on the 15th of February, the Employment Committee would like to ask the Council to approve the Pay Policy Statement attached at Appendix B so that it's ready for publication on the Council's website. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs Wilson? You seconded it? Thank you. Is the recommendation agreed? Thank you. Agenda item 19, notice of motion, should I say, is called upon. I called upon Councillor Clark to move his motion relating to the introduction of legislation to reduce the voting age to 16.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Following the referendum for Scottish independence, where 16 and 17-year-olds were able to vote, and the recent adoption of voting at 16 by the Welsh Assembly, I am proposing this motion such that Maidstone councillors can express their support for voting at 16, a move which would affect more than 1.5 million teenagers in the United Kingdom. 16-year-olds can sign up to join the armed forces, legally marry, have children, pay taxes and set up their own businesses. However, in much of the UK, they cannot join the electoral register, and even where they can, they cannot vote in parliamentary elections. All of the major political parties take great steps to reach out to the elusive young vote, only to find it to be elusive, with younger voters unengaged, unreachable and uninterested in the electoral process. Elected members are encouraged to visit schools and local groups such as the Scouts and Girl Guides to talk about the political process and to engage in a constructive debate on issues that affect the young. Kent has a youth county council with 78 members elected across 12 districts, including 9 from Maidstone. In the 2017 elections, a total of 21,734 votes were cast, giving an indication of just how engaged young people can be locally. At age 16, before leaving home for university or work, many young people have the stability of living with a family in their hometown or village. Here they are much more likely to hold a view on issues affecting their local surroundings and would in turn be likely to express those views at the ballot box. Evidence suggests they would be more likely to continue voting in future years after leaving home if they cast their first vote at 16. Looking back at the Scottish referendum, Very few would argue that it was a mistake to allow 16-year-olds to cast a vote for the future of Scotland. If we want the young to responsibly contribute to society, then we should give them the right to shape that society. To sum up, I urge members to support this motion and to send a united message to central government that this borough supports the reduction of the voting age to 16. Thank you, Chairman.
I was in the lovely town of Thetford a few years ago looking at an exhibition about a suffragist, not a suffragette, a suffragist, the organisation that campaigned within the law for votes for women. And I'm struck by the massive similarity in this briefing paper of the negative, when you look at the negative arguments, the arguments against allowing votes at 16 to the arguments that were used 100 years ago against allowing votes for women. They're irresponsible. They're too easily influenced. If you substitute husbands for parents in this briefing paper, it's exactly what was said in the arguments against allowing women to vote. No one now in this country, at least, would take that stance. But we still think that young people should have to wait to be involved in the democratic process. Yet, we found the consequences of that rather embarrassing ourselves. We used to have a rule that you could only present petitions to this council if you're 18 and on the electoral register. And then we found a rather articulate young man and his campaigners coming along to present a petition to this council about issues in Jubilee Square, and rather embarrassingly, that young person couldn't present his own petition to this council because he wasn't 18 and not on the electoral register. So we had to rather quickly reconsider our stance. I'm also do try and take note of what's happening around the world. Some of you will have noticed the rather horrific incidents with yet another gun crime in America. What we may not have noted in this country is the rather impressive response of a large number of young people in trying to bring pressure on congressmen and senators, state officials to actually do something about it, and actually moved some Republican Party officials and representatives to actually do what they've never done before and actually support measures towards gun control. Those young people are, by and large, too young to vote and take part in public life in America. Yet they've no shortage of opinions and ability. If you look around the world, what we should be saying is how do we encourage and engage instead of putting up artificial barriers to people's participation. I think that we should be looking at how we embed democracy in our young people rather than trying to prevent them participating, and I support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I always appreciate wit by certain politicians, and one that I can remember very vividly is the expression that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. Winston Churchill, he really did sometimes hit the nail on the head, didn't he? But how many of you have been to Democracy Week in any of our sixth form in schools? All right, just a few, but not all that many. It's an eye-opener. It really is an eye-opener. They're sharp, sometimes hypercritical to make you blush. They really can put their finger on the things that are wrong. And they really do bring it home to you that we do need to listen to their opinion. And they don't have a voice at the moment in England. And that, I think, is a great shame. In the Kent County Council, there is such a thing as the Youth County Council, which has been brought into being over some years, and that has a very muted effect, unfortunately, but nevertheless it is a voice for young people. Now, at 18, you know, people have gone beyond what I would call adolescent youth. They are young adults, of course, and from 18 to 25, that's a special group, isn't it? But there's nothing for the 16 and 17 group, who I think are very, very important and precious to us. Can we just remember for one moment, I do very, very vividly, if you're young enough or old enough perhaps, to understand and remember when a certain chap with a lot of hair, and I don't mean Boris, stood up at the Conservative Party conference in Thatcher's day and spoke so vividly that he brought the house down. He was 16 years old, and his name was William Hague. He became Foreign Secretary within the next 15 to 20 years and became also the leader of his party. Probably the most unfortunate thing for this country was he never actually made Prime Minister. But we can look at those sorts of things with hindsight now and know where we missed an opportunity. All other areas of the UK and associated territories already have given permission for 16, 17 youth to be given a voice in voting. So what is it about us in England? Why are we all such bloody-minded, and I have to use this term, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, bloody-minded, very, very individual, all must be the odd man out when it comes to actually changing our attitudes. Let it change now. Let Maidstone actually lead for once.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Matt Burton.
Matt Burton? Sorry, Mr. Mayor, was that me? Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was delighted to see a motion like this coming forward before this council, not only because it gives me the opportunity to speak with some authority as the member who can most readily recall being actually 16. Sorry. But also because the political enfranchisement of our next generation in this country, to use all the buzzwords, is something that I've supported and campaigned for some years. Unfortunately, Mr. Mayor, the motion as written in front of us almost entirely misses the point. During the last few years of my teens, I became quite heavily involved in youth politics, chairing KYCC for a year, which has been talked about this evening, and sitting as a representative for the South East of England on the annual Youth Select Committee. For those who don't know anything about the Youth Select Committee, it's organised by the British Youth Council. It's the macro-national equivalent of our Youth Council here in Kent. And annually, they put together a group of usually 11, 12 to 18-year-olds to scrutinise the government on a chosen topic. The reason I'm telling you this, Mr. Mayor, is not for my own vanity, believe it or not, but first to show examples of what politically engaged, informed and supported under-18s really can achieve. Now, compare this to the sort of activity that another person who might have had the opportunity to vote for decades, but has never had the support, information or inclination to do so. I hope we can then all dispel the toxic untruth that political activity or capability is naturally tied to one's age, as well as the even greater absurdity that says a political switch is flicked when somebody enters into legally defined adulthood. Rather, the key to enabling political engagement at the point that this motion misses is in education, in properly equipping and motivating the next generation to involve themselves in the democracy that we all love and celebrate here in this chamber. Coincidentally, the year that I sat on the Youth Select Committee, under-18s, elected by other under-18s and representing the youth of the entire country, voted that we should scrutinise the Department for Education on its provision of what we called at the time the Curriculum for Life. A cornerstone of this was the will to provide effective and sustainable political education for all. You'll be devastated to hear that I didn't bring my copy of the report that we had published with me tonight, but take from this instead the powerful message from the youth of just a few years ago that there is not just a hunger to engage politically, but a cry that we in politics should be ensuring that the next generation is more equipped and enabled to do so on aggregate than the last. On merit of that, I would like to propose the following amendment to the motion, reading: This Council supports reducing the voting age to 16 and agrees that the chair of a relevant committee, and that part is important, should write an open letter to the Prime Minister, the Secretary of State for Education and our own local MPs, urging them not just to work on bringing forward legislation to reduce the voting age to 16, but also to investigate, report and implement proper economic and political education for all in this country.
Marion Ring. Right, okay, thank you. So we're now going to debate the amendment.
Oh.
Right, so we're now going to debate the amendment.
Sorry, Chairman. I missed your call there, but that is acceptable to me, Chairman. Mr. Mayor.
Right, we'll continue with the debate then. Thank you very much for that. Much appreciated. Matt Bolton. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, I will modify my remarks based on the very sensible amendment that's been put forward by my colleague, Councillor Burson, because my initial reaction as someone who is open-minded towards the idea of changing the franchise was to was perhaps to support this, but I'm afraid that the motion, as was put by Councillor Clark, was totally half-baked, in the sense that actually what we've heard so far is a lot about why 18 is the wrong age, but not why 16 is the right age. Why not 17 or 15 or 14 or even younger than that? Because ultimately, for people like me who are open-minded towards changing the franchise, this comes in combination with a whole load of other rights that we hold as citizens of the borough. For example, the age in which you're able to get married by your own volition without having to get parental consent. At the moment, you can't join a jury until you're 18. And most importantly, and in relation to this council, you can't actually stand for election until you're 18 at the moment. So if everything was brought down to 16, people like me, I think, would be very happy to support the idea that you vote at 16. And because that was not included in the original amendment, it meant I could not support so. Councillor Burton's proposal is very sensible because it does encompass some of the challenges that come about with the idea that we support votes at 16. And most importantly, as Councillor Burton referred to, it doesn't put the pressure on you, Mr. Mayor, as an apolitical figure, but it's for as this is a political issue, it is for the relevant committee chair to write that letter, not you as the mayor as well. And I think that's very important, and that's another reason why I'm happy to support it. And finally, this is an absolutely crucial issue as we go forward. And I think we will get to a point in our lifetimes when this will change. The question is, as a local authority, with regards to the motion that we're considering now that's on the table, how do we frame that and how do we set our criteria in order for that to change? And that's why I fully support the amendment that's been put, because it gives us a roadmap towards doing so. And I'm very glad that the movers of the motion agreed to do so, because I feel that Councillor Burton has corrected some of the things that were very, very evidently missing from the original motion.
Thank you. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members. Yes, I've heard a lot of arguments and I can understand the feelings. This is quite an emotive subject. And I have to say I hesitate a bit myself on it. First of all, I didn't like the idea of yourself writing the letter, and I think that's certainly being corrected. However, I do have issues with this, Because the popular view in this room, I can see and I sense, is we all want to reduce the vote. So I'm going to put the argument a little bit differently, if I may. Not that I'm totally against, but I think there are issues that need to be considered. First of all, the age of the majority in this country is 18. That's a given. And that's always been the system under universal suffrage in this country. Well, I first voted when I was 21, when that was the age of majority. And that's, I think, always been very sensible. I find the argument that young people need to be encouraged into politics and having the vote is rather strange, actually, and just a little bit patronising. I don't think they need to have the vote to be interested in politics. I certainly got into politics myself as a young Conservative at the time, and I didn't have the vote for several years, so it didn't stop me from being involved in politics. The universal suffrage in this country has been achieved with quite a fight. It took 100 years between the Great Reform Bill and what my mother called the flapper vote of 1928, and she was one of those, and she proudly said, flappers who voted. So it was a struggle, and on the continent it was even greater. There's always been a struggle, and this has to be respected. It's not a Me Too must-have. It is something that must be earned and must be respected. And I think that going down to 16 is a problem, because at 16 you don't have that fiscal responsibility that you have a little bit older. The French have a wonderful saying that in the first round I vote with my heart, and in the second round I vote with my wallet. And the 16-year-olds don't have the wallet to vote. And I know it sounds a bit hard-nosed, but I think that is an issue that needs to be considered. I think the answer, my advice, was that you should youngsters should join a political group, preferably a Conservative one, but even Councillor Harper's mob would do. Study it. Yeah, I think education that's mentioned by Councillor Burton is incredibly important, and I think that needs to be built on. Delivering leaflets, pounding the roads is also very important. That gets you involved. And finally, I would ask you to spare a moment. Go on the internet, have a look at the great Eugene Delacroix's painting of Liberty Leading the People. That will symbolise what this is really all about. And the suffrage was earned. So I'll finish there, but I'll just make those points. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's an interesting subject because some of us take the attitude teenagers don't have opinions, teenagers don't know their own minds. My goodness, I've had some feisty teenagers in my house, and they're a scary bunch. They know what they want, and they know when they want it. We have a lot of 25-year-olds who have the vote. They don't vote. They don't care. They're not interested. So if you have got 16, 17-year-olds who are interested and engaged, why not let them vote? Let me just give you one reference. When the EU referendum was due to take place, my parents asked my children, who were 15 and 12 at the time, how their grandparents should vote. Both my boys were a little bit puzzled. We're being consulted. And they both said, you must vote Remain. You must vote to stay in the European Union. It's a positive thing. My father nodded his head and they left. A month later, they came back for lunch. And the same question was put to my children, and they came back with the same answer. Granny and Grandpa, we must stay in the European Union. My mother and father voted out. My eldest son, the day after the vote, wouldn't get out of bed and go to school because he was so disgusted that, in his view, older people who are probably going to be dead by the time it's all sorted out will not have to suffer the consequences. So here we have a situation. If 16 and 17-year-olds had been able to vote on that day, what would the results have been? I think it would have been different, and I think we would have stayed in the EU. So personally, I think 16 and 17-year-olds should have the vote.
Thank you. Councillor Fermor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd first like to say how depressing it is to hear the leader of the Conservative group of a certain age say that he doesn't believe that young people deserve the right to vote. I can assure you they're very interesting and very interested people, and they deserve it just as much as you do. I'd like to wholeheartedly to support this motion. As another younger member of the council, I've very much made it my mission to go out and speak to the people and the young people in our schools. I've been very proudly going back to my former school, Invicta Grammar School, and in fact 2 young girls came in, I think it was about 6 months ago, came and sat in this chamber to hear a full council meeting. It was the Christmas one, and I think it was a bit bizarre for them because we had kind of presents laid out on the tables. But anyway, we discussed all of the papers, we chatted about it, and it was amazing just how interested and how many questions they asked. And it would be great to see many more of them coming. So I think I can speak for all young people just how engaging it is to be involved. And it's been, as a young councillor, knocking on someone's door and speaking to someone who would usually have kind of passed it along to their mum and dad. They wouldn't have ordinarily engaged in that conversation, and on many occasions they have, and I know they have. So I would like to give my support to the motion. Thank you very much for putting it forward, and very much thank you for all the people that have spoken in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Derek Mortimer.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I fully support the motion with the amendment as well. One thought I've had is on a local basis regarding neighbourhood plans. When we do a neighbourhood plan, we sometimes have consultants come in, as you did at Staplehurst, and invite the whole community in, mums, dads, all the children. And yet when it comes to the referendum, the kids have to stay outside. And they've probably contributed as much as the parents with their modelling and their drawings, etc., that the consultants have taken on board. So I fully support the motion.
You are on the list.
It's okay. Thank you. Service is normal. Councillor Powell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Obviously, I won't be supporting this kind of motion tonight, and certainly after hearing Councillor Blackmore mention about the old people that might not be around to see the result. Well, I'm hoping there's one person here that, after working so hard to actually achieve the result, will be around, although it might be close. Yeah, yeah. And it's nothing to do with the fact that I won't be able to enjoy a celebrationary drink, whatever way, or commiseration with the people when they are the 16 and 17-year-olds. But anyway, no, that's something else. One of the things that does concern me is the fact I've heard tonight there's lots of political stuff coming into this chamber, whether it's 16 and 17-year-olds can vote. And I know it's only something that's going to be passed up, and we've heard Councillor Harper. It's quite amusing, actually, some of the things that Councillor Harper says, but it's all to do with national politics. I would like us to concentrate a lot more on what happens in Maidstone, what happens with the enforcement, the planning, the illegal cars, the rubbish, and the things that we should be concentrating on, rather than... This is ridiculous what we're doing here at the moment, to be quite honest. But what I would also... But if you are going to do it, and I would say to the side opposite, get something else on the agenda for the next meeting. You know, let's talk about proportional representation. Well, you're going to support me on that. And then the meeting after that, should we do something else? But I don't think that this motion is going anywhere at all tonight. Let's concentrate on Maidstone and let the country decide on what the country is going to do.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Munford.
I'm always up for a balanced discussion. We form our opinions by our experiences. So I want to share one experience, and I'm not going to come to a conclusion. For 5 years, I've engaged with my community through the parish magazine. I have over 100 people at my parish meeting every year. I have advertised for the last 5 years and tried to get a youth parish council. I've achieved one person who then we engaged with and tried to help him. I'm afraid I still do not have a youth parish council. That's my experience.
Thank you. Councillor Bryce?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, I'm very pleased to agree with somebody that, for me, embodies everything that is great about public service and is a great role model to the young folks of Maidstone Borough Council, which is Councillor Daly, who I don't often have the pleasure of agreeing with due to our political differences. But thank you, Councillor Daly, for giving me that opportunity. I actually think I have the opportunity, actually maybe more than most people in this chamber, to engage with young people very regularly. And the data shows, as do my experiences, that actually they are among the most responsible folks in our society. They are very engaged. They are more likely to volunteer than ever before. They're less likely to engage in risky behaviour than ever before. And we really, put a lot of pressure on our young people. I think to the point about, their financial status. Well, actually, if you're 17 now and you're looking through around a university or making decisions about what kind of job you take, whether or not you go into an apprenticeship, whether or not, you go to university, or whether or not you try and do a combination of both, or simply exit onto the job market, you're making the biggest financial decision of your life now at 17. And, that is because of a Labour Prime Minister, because I was at university when the tuition fees were brought in by a Labour Prime Minister. And it has such a big impact on the rest of your life that I think it's absolutely vital that we give 16, 17-year-olds the right to vote, because they only get it once every 4 years in an election cycle. So, they should have the chance to have a say on the policies that will impact them for the rest of their lives. I think, I agree with the points that colleagues have made, and I welcome the amendment made by Councillor Burton to make this more relevant. And I would ask us all to think about how we can still increase turnout amongst 18 to 24-year-olds. There's still the segment of society who are least likely to vote in elections. It's only around 40 to 50%, and the reported surge supported surge for the Labour Party, driven by the younger folk, is actually not proven by the British Election Survey. So we still have a job to do, whatever side of the political fence that you sit on. And, I suggest that we all take that away with ourselves.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Prendergast.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll try and be very brief too. Alas, I am no longer young, but I think members of the Kent Youth County Council, especially the newly elected members who were elected just recently, would be extremely disappointed to hear another member say that they have a muted effect, because they most certainly don't, as articulated so ably by Councillor Burton Jr. at the other end. I have attended every single meeting of the Kent Youth County Council since last May. I don't recall seeing you there, but the next meeting is on the 25th of March, and I'm sure they'd welcome seeing you there, or indeed any other member of this council who would like to join us. 25th of March, it's a Sunday morning, 10:30, but the youth certainly do have a voice, certainly have an opinion, and they can engage in politics. So I will be supporting the amendment as put forward by Councillor Burton. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. David Burton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll try and keep this brief. I'll start by just picking up on a couple of points that Councillor Mrs Blackmore raised. If I'd had the vote when my parents and grandparents took us into Europe, maybe we wouldn't have gone in the first place. So, look at it that way as well. And perhaps within that, there's a balance. There is a fear that we give young people the vote. There's as much in one direction as the other. It's not a foregone conclusion. They have minds. They'll give consideration. The other thing I can't but resist saying, and take this as a compliment, you referred to the feisty teenager, and I remember you being one, and some things don't change.
I'll take it.
So, proud father moment it was, watching Matt on BBC Parliament Channel, sat in Westminster in the Boothroyd room, I think it was, participating in a very mature debate. Very young people considering issues in a very, very thought-out, mature manner. And I think I've had another proud father moment this evening hearing him speak. But that's not why I'm supporting this motion. It's because of the emphasis that is being given about the curriculum for life and actually equipping young people as they come through the latter stages of education, that they have the most basic understanding of where the vote goes, what it does, different tiers of local government, parish, a basic understanding so that they can engage. That's the enabling part, and I'm very, very happy to support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that's everybody. Can I ask Councillor Matt Burton to read out his amendment, please, as we do not have copies?
You certainly can, Mr Mayor, if you bear with me a second.
Which has now become the motion. Thank you.
It goes a little bit like this. This council supports reducing the voting age to 16 and agrees that the chair of a relevant committee should write an open letter to the Prime Minister, the Secretary of State for Education and our own local MPs, urging them not just to work to bring forward legislation to reduce the voting age to 16, but also to investigate, report on and implement proper economic and political education for all.
Councillor Clark, do you now want to sum up?
Yes, please, Mr Mayor. As members may appreciate, I made this motion deliberately simple. All of the additions to the amendment I'll happily take. I don't think there's anything there that isn't moving in the right direction. And I really welcome all of the debate this evening on both sides. As people have mentioned, sometimes you go to these younger groups, you go to the schools, you go to the Scouts, you go to the Girl Guides, and they give you a hard time. And I actually really enjoy that, because I remember when I was there, I remember a teacher of mine, Dr. Pettit, had this general studies in sixth form called Ethical Dilemmas, and it was one of my favourite classes that I had throughout the whole time I was in education. I loved the fact that I could make a point and he would argue and we'd be sparring with one another. We wouldn't necessarily agree, but boy, did he make you think, and boy, did he make other people in that forum think also. I think our role as a borough council is to tell government what we feel about national politics. I think we're here not just for the local minutiae. We're supporting people in our borough, not just for their bin collections and the sort of things that we have to do that are important locally, but I think we also have to help the young members of our borough aspire to something else. If they've got these thoughts, if they want to get involved, we should be trying to help them, because I'm not sure somebody in Westminster will be thinking of the younger people in Maidstone. Now, going back to the referendum, the Lords actually did want voting at 16. They passed a rule that it would go to 16-year-olds. It went back to the Commons, and unfortunately it was defeated 303 to 253. But it isn't the fact that all older people sort of feel that the young shouldn't get involved. I think that's a good example of where people do understand that the young, they're coming up, and this is their future. We're making big decisions on their behalf, and why shouldn't they have a role in that? Why should we make the decisions and lock them out of that? So I really welcome the debate this evening. I will take the amendments because I think they're all in line with what we're trying to achieve here. I think it was a good debate, and I hope everyone will support the concept of giving our 16-year-olds the ability to determine their future. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harvey, you seconded the motion. Did you want to speak? Thank you. Vote. Those in favour? Those against? Abstentions?
That's carried.
That is carried. Thank you very much. Agenda item 20, notice of motion. I call upon Councillor Atkinson to move the motion relating to the high-speed rail service.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Harper has left me a written speech. Shall I start again? Yeah, Councillor Harper has left me a written speech, so these are his words, but I echo them. I'd like to move this motion on behalf of the United Labour Group as deputy and the quieter half of the group. Even quieter tonight because I've got a sore throat. The proposal is easy for the Council tonight to formally support the maintenance of the high-speed train service to Maidstone West. Paul was on the train going to work this morning talking to people and asking them to sign the Kent Messenger petition. He was surprised by how many people didn't know that the service was under threat. Support for the petition was unanimous. I would like to pledge the Labour Party's support to the multi-party campaign. As Paul said in his KM letter, as someone who commutes weekly on the service, Paul knows how vital it is to our town. In fact, the direct service to St Pancras on the high-speed line should be extended throughout the day. Today, we were told by one commuter that the threat to withdraw the service had led them to plan to move away from Maidstone. However, the franchising process highlights the weakness of a privatised rail network, which is why Labour is calling for a publicly owned railway. This can be achieved, as was demonstrated by the previous return of the East Coast Main Line under the previous Labour government, where the service was improved. The other thing which is needed with the high-speed service is to remove the premium charge. Paying over £52 for a daily ticket is paying over the odds when the rolling stock was bought for the 2012 Olympics in London. However, tonight we all need to show our united support for the current service by supporting our uncontroversial motion. I reserve my right to reply. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Willis.
The right, and if someone can correctly put it, with the right of an amendment. I want to make a small amendment to it to make it more inclusive.
Let's make an amendment to it.
Is that what? Can I second it with an amendment?
Yes.
If the proposer is willing to accept the amendment.
You second it, and now can you tell us what the amendment is, please?
Okay, so I'll try and keep it short, as quickly as we can. It's scandalous that Maidstone services to London at the moment from some stations, as some of the members for Bearsted know, are far slower than they are in steam times. We need services under an hour. The motion is excellent. I support it. However, it needs to mention London stations and refer to Thameslink as well, because as we're all aware, Thameslink has been delayed, and there is a bit of fuzziness about actually how it will be delivered. So I would like to ask to change the wording where it says St Pancras stations. What our officers will work on and what they work on is trying to get multiple stations. So what we'd like to say is, in light of all party support for the continuation of a direct high-speed train service, I'm taking for granted we do support, I'd like to change that to services from Maidstone, not West, to London stations. So, in light of all party support for continuation of direct high-speed services, so that will include Thameslink, from Maidstone, so take out the word West, to London stations, because we need city services back, which is what Thameslink are. This council resolves, and then to simplify it, take point 2 off it, because our MP, I'll be frank with you, there are a number of people working very hard towards this, cross-party, particularly our Lib Dem leadership of the council, but also the MPs. I fully respect that. They are working hard towards it. So remove point 2 to keep things simple, and change point 1 to say, so as it says, formally adopt a position of support for continuation of high-speed train link and no delay to the December 18 this year, December 18 adoption of Thameslink services to London Bridge, the City and Cambridge. Basically, do you need to read the wording again? Yeah, is that clear? Can we ask the proposer if he'll accept that? It includes Thameslink, basically.
Do you accept that? Right, okay.
So now to the debate.
Right, to the debate. Yeah. Right, Councillor Burton.
So you've got to bring it. And English.
I think I'm 65% on board with what Councillor Willis is saying. So let me just explain my point to you, and then perhaps there can be a unanimous support of the right words. I'm sort of starting with the second part of the motion as written first, and Councillor Willis has made the point, but I checked with, well, Helen Grant particularly, about the extent of lobbying that is already going on, and she's absolutely. So what I'm actually proposing by way of wording, and maybe we can agree this, is that we thank our MPs for their efforts in lobbying ministers on all aspects of improving rail services in the borough, and offer our support to them in their continued efforts. And within that is the other emphasis that rather than list specifically all of the services, that, and this is my rewording of the first part of the motion, that we would request Strategic Planning, Sustainability, Transportation Committee continue their watching brief on any proposed changes to rail services in the borough, and continue to respond to all consultations to seek further improvements in rail services for Maidstone. So by wording it in that manner, absolutely all rail, and getting behind our MPs for the good job that they're already doing. I don't know how procedurally we operate this now, but that is how I think we should move forwards.
If I may, this is intended to be helpful. I think a lot of the things that you've referred to are already within the terms of reference of your committee. And I'd just like, well, I think that's an important point for people to be aware of. Perhaps don't need to be repeated. Procedural point from Clive English.
Councillor English.
Councillor Burton were minded to actually propose formally what he said. It would be a very productive amendment if he just simply omitted the word watching, because his committee has done far more than simply watch. But I would like to second what Councillor Burton said as a replacement for the motion as amended by Councillor Willis and Atkinson.
For clarity, Mr Mayor, I'd be happy to delete that word watching.
Can I request that you read it out again so that everybody's clear what you're saying?
There's a 1 and a 2 in line with the original motion. So 1, let's put it this way, that full council supports Strategic Planning, Sustainability, Transportation Committee in their continued their continued work assessing proposed changes to rail services in the borough, and continue to respond to all consultations to seek further improvements in rail services for Maidstone. So that's a replacement for 1, and that 2 would become that Council thank our MPs for their efforts in lobbying ministers in all aspects of improved rail service in the borough, and offer our support to them in their continued efforts.
Councillors Atkinson and Willis, do you accept that? Councillor Atkinson?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm happy with that, apart from the word further, further improvements, because I'm not sure there have been any improvements, so maybe delete the word further.
Happy to say all improvements rather than further improvements. The purpose being to make it as inclusive to every situation where we can get any improvement, any addition of rail service for the borough.
Councillor Willis, are you happy with that?
Yes, I'd just like to highlight that the deadline for the franchise bids is next week. This is a really urgent issue. It is getting late. I think we're demonstrating that we as a council do support under an hour rail services from Maidstone. It's really important. We need to work together to do that. It's a county town, for goodness sake, and we really need to fight. And we want our MPs to do that, and we'll all get behind and help. We'll campaign and we'll help make sure they do that. Okay. Yes. So yes.
Councillor Wilson?
I'm sure we all want to go home, but I do want to say something on this, because this was raised at the Kent and Medway Economic Partnership weeks ago, where I spoke to it, the leader of Sevenoaks spoke to it, and the leader of Tunbridge and Malling spoke to it. And I'm not suggesting you change what you've written, but the business community have taken this up in very strenuous terms, and it is one of those occasions where everybody is on the same page, working together to see that we retain and improve these services to Maidstone. And the MPs are already doing it, the business community is already doing it, every single political party is already doing it, and so I'm very happy to support this, but I just want everybody to know just how hard the entire community of Maidstone is working on this, and we do have to keep the pressure up. So happy to support it, but let's not think that we're not doing all we can, because we are.
Councillor Borden, did you want to speak? Thank you.
No, thanks. It was a comment on the original motion, which is now gone, so no, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Atkinson, do you want to sum up?
I think it's all been said. I mean, everyone clearly agrees the service needs improvement. Everyone's working together. So let's just move to the vote. Thank you.
Right. Right. Let's move to the vote.
Do you want to read it out?
Do you want to read it out? No, no. Let's move to the vote. All those for. And against? And against? Abstentions? Okay, thank you very much, councillors.
Mr Mayor, can I just explain that Councillor Harwood is on call tonight, and he just had a call which he's had to take. So apologies that he had to go out of the...
Right, councillors, move on. Thank you. Agenda item 21, report of the Head of Policy, Communications and Governance, review of allocation of seats on committees, page 170. I call upon the Head of Policy, Communications and Governance to submit a report relating to the review which has been undertaken for the allocation of seats on committees.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I commend the report to Council.
Leader.
I move the recommendations on page 170.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Perry. Thank you. Is the motion agreed? Thank you. Agenda item 22, report of the Head of Policy, Communications and Governance, calendar of meetings 2018-19, page 181. I move that the calendar of meetings 2018-19 be approved. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Wilson. Is that agreed? Right. Excuse me. Agenda item 23, appointment of Mayor Select 2018-19. In accordance with the agreed protocol to guide members when electing the Mayor should have first held the post of Deputy Mayor in the preceding mayoral election. The Deputy Mayor is Councillor David Nagy. Councillor English. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I could spend a considerable time speaking about the virtues of Councillor Nagy. I will simply comment at this stage that it is America's loss and our gain that he chose to pursue his political career here. President Nagy instead of President Trump, it would have been interesting. So I will at this stage, because much more can be said at a later time and will be said at a later time, that Councillor David Nagy be appointed as Mayor Select for the municipal year 2018 to 19.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newton, do you second that?
I do second that, and I'm rather pleased that will become the mayor, and as I know, I've known him and his family for many years. His ward members really support this appointment, and I know damn well he'll do a damn good job. I'm pleased to second him.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Round.
Thank you. I offer my warm congratulations and support for David Nagy, and I'd just like to remind him that it was some 10 years ago, probably, when we met, and I actually thought you were a complete idiot. At the time, something has changed since. Sorry, I did hear some comments behind me. But the reason was, at the time, I was representing the rural communities at a Maidstone tourism gig, as it were, and you were probably the most infectious, motivated, enthusiastic person I'd ever met, who constantly went on and on about how wonderful the town centre was. Well, since then, I've come to learn to appreciate how wonderful the town is, and I know that you've come to appreciate how wonderful the rural communities is. So, for your warmth, your care, your motivation, and your enthusiasm, which will be very infectious, I think this will be a very good quality to make you very qualified to be a very great mayor. Congratulations.
Thank you, Councillor. Mrs. Gooch.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Congratulations, Councillor Nagy. On behalf of the Independent Group, I'd like to support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll cut out some of the stuff I was going to say because it's already been said. But on behalf of the Labour Group, the Magnificent Two, as we call ourselves, I'm very pleased to support the nomination of fellow Maidstone United fan David as Mayor Select for the forthcoming municipal year. I feel I can draw a parallel between tonight's meeting and supporting Maidstone United, because last week's council meeting was postponed, and now last night's match against the top of the table Macclesfield has also been postponed. So there are parallels. Anyway, knowing David as I do, I know he'll do a good job, so congratulations on your selection.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other nominations? Is the motion agreed? David, I wish you all the very best. And I thank you so much for all the help you've given us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those kind words.
Agenda item 24, appointment of Deputy Mayor Select 2018-19. In accordance with the agreed protocol to guide members when appointing the Deputy Mayor, the most senior member of the Council as set out in the order of seniority by length of service of members who have not previously held the office of Mayor, who wish to take up that office and who have, and have served for a minimum of 6 years, should be appointed to the position of Deputy Mayor. That member is Councillor Marion Ring. Councillor Garland.
No speeches this time, Mr Mayor. We've been told no speeches, so I shall be brief. It gives me huge pleasure to propose that Councillor Marion Ring be appointed as Deputy Mayor Select for the municipal year 2018-2019 for the AGM.
Thank you, Chris. I'm sure you will. You must have plenty of stories relating to Marion, as we all do. Councillor Joy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Second.
I'm happy to second the motion for Deputy Mayor Select 2018-19 to be Mrs Marion Ring, and just like to say it's good to know that we have a lady mayor in waiting. It's been 10 years. So, yeah, I was the last one, so it's taken us 10 years. So, looking forward to it. Well done, Marion.
Thank you, Councillor. Remember that, 10 years. Well, Councillor Mrs Gooch, I haven't forgotten you.
I hope you haven't, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Congratulations, Marion. Just think. I was so excited. I really think that after all your hard work, I know we're not supposed to say anything, but you're such a character. And I will be able to see you, I can see you talking to your people now and the residents. You will do a grand job. And you've just, actually, I've just put my foot in it, because I didn't say anything about Councillor Nagy. But hey, life can be difficult, can't it? But I wish you all the very best, and on behalf of the independent group, we gladly support your nomination to be, is it the Deputy Mayor Select for 18-19. Well done, Marion.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barnett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll keep it brief. There's a lot to come at the next meeting. Murray and I go back a long way, probably getting on for 20 years now, isn't it, I think? And I would have no hesitation on behalf of the UKIP group in supporting the recommendation for Councillor Mary Ring for Deputy Mayor for the next civic year.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have great pleasure on behalf of Paul Harper and myself to second Marion to be Deputy Mayor next year. Paul told me he has a lot of respect for Marion. Marion's always been helpful, and when Chair of Housing would help with casework. So bring it on.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Are there any other nominations? No. Right, thank you. Is the motion agreed? Thank you. I declare the meeting closed, and may I thank you very much for good debating this evening. Drive carefully and a safe journey home. Thank you.